During World War II, the skies above Europe, Asia, and the Pacific often turned into killing grounds, not just from fighter planes and bombers, but from the relentless barrage of anti-aircraft fire known as Flak. From the ground, it looked like black puffs of smoke exploding in the path of enemy bombers. For those in the air, it was an ever-present deadly storm. Each shell that burst sent thousands of razor-sharp fragments whirling through the sky at supersonic speed, tearing through metal and flesh alike. But here's the staggering reality. The vast majority of flak shells never brought down a plane. Millions were fired during the war. So what happened to all that metal once it exploded? This is the story of the flak shells of World War II. Where they went, the dangers they left behind, and how their fragments still speak of the war today. Flak, short for Flugabwehrkanon or air defense cannon in German, was designed to create a deadly cloud of shrapnel in the path of enemy aircraft. The principle was simple, but brutal. You didn't need to hit a bomber directly. You only needed to get close enough for the shell to explode and fill the air with fragments. A typical World War II flak shell was a timed or proximity-fused round, ranging in size from 20mm autocannon shells to massive 88mm and 128mm projectiles. Once fired, the shell arced toward the estimated position of the target. At a preset moment, or when a proximity fuse detected an aircraft, it detonated. Inside was a steel casing packed with high explosives and surrounded by a fragmentation layer. When it burst, thousands of jagged shards, some weighing mere grams, others several ounces, spread outward at incredible speeds. For the bombers flying through this zone, it was like passing through a wall of invisible knives. Even a single fragment could rupture fuel lines, puncture control cables, or wound crew. Yet for every shell that scored a damaging hit, countless others burst harmlessly in the air. Their fragments, though no longer aimed at a target, still had to fall somewhere, and their journey back to Earth could be unpredictable and dangerous. When a flak shell exploded, the fragments didn't simply vanish after missing their target. Each piece became a tiny, fast-moving projectile in its own right. At the moment of detonation, some shards continued forward with the shell's original velocity, while others spun outward in all directions. At bomber altitudes, often 20,000 to 30,000 feet, these fragments could travel significant distances before gravity slowed them. Many lost speed quickly due to air resistance, but even small pieces of steel falling from such heights could still reach dangerous speeds by the time they hit the ground. For crews in nearby aircraft, there was the constant risk of friendly flak fragments drifting into their flight path. Escort fighters sometimes reported being struck by shrapnel from friendly guns aimed at enemy bombers. On the ground, civilians and soldiers alike were vulnerable. During the Blitz over London, falling shrapnel from British anti-aircraft fire frequently damaged roofs, shattered windows, and injured bystanders. Newspapers at the time warned residents to take shelter not only from bombs, but also from the rain of metal caused by their own defenses. In rural areas, much of the debris simply scattered across fields and forests, unnoticed at first, but it remained there long after the smoke cleared, hidden reminders of the battles fought high above. Once flak fragments completed their journey from the sky, they often left a physical mark on whatever they struck. In urban areas, these impacts were sometimes mistaken for bomb damage. Roof tiles were cracked, gutters punctured, and window glass shattered by the force of falling metal. In cities like London, Berlin, and Tokyo, cleanup crews regularly swept streets for jagged steel shards after heavy raids. Some fragments were small enough to be picked up by hand, while others, fist-sized chunks from large-caliber shells, embedded themselves in walls, vehicles, or even the ground. The human toll from this friendly debris was significant. During the Blitz, British civil defense records documented hundreds of injuries from falling shrapnel, some fatal. Helmets were not just for soldiers. Wardens and rescue workers wore them to guard against the constant drizzle of steel. In rural landscapes, farmers sometimes discovered larger fragments lodged in their fields. Over time, plowing and weather would bring them to the surface. In coastal regions, fragments that fell into the sea sank into the sediment, but many were washed ashore during storms where beachgoers might stumble upon them decades later. Even military installations were not immune. Allied air bases in England reported occasional damage to parked aircraft from their own flak defenses, with shards tearing through wing or fuselages after missing their intended target. Though small compared to the devastation caused by bombs, the widespread scatter of flak debris was a constant reminder that anti-aircraft fire came with risks, not only to the enemy above, but to those living and working directly beneath the gun. The intense use of flak during World War II left behind a surprising environmental footprint. In areas that saw repeated air raids, such as the Ruhr Valley, southern England, and major Pacific ports, the ground absorbed tons of fragmented steel over the course of the war. Most of these pieces were inert, posing no explosive threat, but they lingered for decades in soil, gardens, and farmland. Over time, corrosion broke them down, releasing traces of iron, copper, and other metals into the earth. In heavily shelled zones, especially around former airfields and industrial targets, metal detectors still revealed dense concentrations of shrapnel just below the surface. Some fragments ended up in rivers, lakes, or coastal waters, where they slowly degraded. Although flak shells did not carry the same chemical risks as certain bombs, their remnants still contributed to the vast quantity of war debris scattered across landscapes worldwide. In many places, these tiny shards of steel remain the only physical trace of battles once fought high overhead, a hidden layer of history beneath our feet. When the war ended, clearing unexploded ordnance was a top priority, but flak debris presented a different challenge. Most of it was already fragmented, posing no immediate danger beyond the risk of sharp edges. Still, in cities and on airfields, tons of scrap had to be collected to make streets and runways safe again. In many countries, the post-war scrap drives turned flak fragments into valuable raw materials. Children in Britain and Germany alike were encouraged to gather metal for recycling into peacetime goods. Large intact shells that had failed to detonate were more dangerous. These required bomb disposal squads to neutralize or destroy them, and occasional accidents claimed lives well after 1945. Over time, most visible flak debris disappeared, melted down into steel for rebuilding railways, factories, and homes. But in rural fields, forests, and old rooftops, traces remained. For historians, collectors, and archaeologists, these remnants have become small but telling artifacts, reminders of the war's reach and the sheer scale of the defensive barrages that once filled the skies. Millions of flak shells were fired during World War II, yet only a fraction ever struck an aircraft. The rest burst into countless shards that rained back to Earth, leaving behind both visible scars and hidden traces. Some fragments injured civilians, damaged property, or littered streets. Others lay quietly for decades in fields, forests, and seabeds, slowly rusting away. A few survived intact, becoming prized relics for collectors and museum displays. The story of flak is not just about the battle in the sky, it's about the impact on the ground and the way war leaves its mark far from the front lines. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There's much more history waiting to be uncovered.